Everybody, I'm James. I go by all pronouns. Welcome to art class. I'm going to be your Bob Ross today. Let's paint. All right, so as you can see, this is my little setup, and I'm timing this for an hour just so that I can monitor my progress. And I have my brushes, I got my rag, I've got my water, I've got the brushes I want to use laid out, and some over here just in case, and a sponge, and a palette knife. And I brought some paints from home as well, but basically what I did was take one of every color, because what I'm going to do today is a little bit of an homage to the rainbow. Maybe it's a little corny, but I do love the concept of a rainbow and what it stands for, especially in the context of the LGBTQ community. I love the idea that we're all a spectrum and together we are a bandwidth of light. Okay, so in that spirit, I'm going to do a bouquet of flowers today. Partially with the intention of painting this for a friend whose birthday happened yesterday. And I'm going to paint flowers from the Philippines, which is where I'm from. And maybe as we go along, I can tell you a little bit about my experiences. All right, so let's get started. As you can see, I've already done kind of like a light sketch of what I might want to do. And it's always a good idea to use just like a light pencil. Don't draw too dark. As you can see, I used a blue pencil here. I like to flip it upside down and see if it looks good upside down, just to see if the composition's balanced, so I can see like, okay, I might want to make those leaves bigger. Like maybe push the vase a bit to the side. All right. And I also kind of took the liberty of putting all of my paint on my palette in advance. I basically just put one of each color on the palette board, because today the goal is to actually put every single color I can think of on the canvas. This is a class that I do sometimes in painting. Instead of doing a color wheel, I challenge people to create paintings where they use every single color. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. Do my first layer, just kind of like mapping out what the painting's gonna be like, and not worrying too much about making it look awesome. Red. All right, so I wanna make flower happen over here. This one's going to be a hibiscus, and it's going to be red because that happens to be my favorite kind of hibiscus. Back in the Philippines, we call this gumamela, and the root of that word is actually goma, which means rubber, because I'm not sure. I guess it has kind of a rubbery sap. I also think the word gumamela is just prettier than hibiscus, but you know, that's just me. All right, very rough application here. I'm just kind of like laying down where the colors are gonna be. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm gonna kind of like work my way around the rainbow here and just kind of go red, orange, yellow, green, blue, etc. Over here, I wanna do some bougainvillea. I believe this is a flower that the Spaniards brought over, I'm not really sure, but bougainvillea is everywhere in the Philippines. It just hangs over the side of practically every wall, and it's gorgeous. All right, gonna work my way up here to this flower. Some people call this flower calachuchi, but I'm not sure if that's the right word for it. All I remember is like these flowers are super bitter. If you would touch the petals and then put your finger in your mouth, like most kids would, you would retch because it's horrible. It's just really, really bitter. This flower has like a nice hollow white center. Okay, what other colors do I want to put here? Okay, let's do the santan. Santan are like a bunch of tiny little flowers that are clumped together. I used to love, well, as kids we would just kind of rip the flowers off the bush and throw it up like confetti. All right, that's getting going. And here I'm gonna do a little like bird of paradise flower sort of. So I might be a little homesick. It's been a minute since I was back there. It can be a pretty jarring experience, moving your life halfway across the world. But I gotta say, it's been an interesting journey living here in Canada. I was always curious about this place. My dad's Canadian, and we never really came here a lot. Like when I was a kid, maybe one time. I don't really remember it. So I was always curious about my place as a Canadian. What it meant to be Canadian actually versus just on paper. That's the weird thing about being a Canadian born abroad. Your only connection to this place is, well, in the 90s it was Alanis Morissette and Wolverine. Okay, that's looking like a pretty warm palette so far. Missing a little bit of the blues and stuff. Not a lot of blue flowers in the Philippines, but there is this Philippine violet that we have that's kind of like a soft baby blue. And maybe to compensate for that, I'm gonna make the vase like really purple. All right. Purple, purple. Ooh, that's a little bit darker than I thought it would be. No worries. You can always use water to thin down your colors. So 1 hour isn't a lot of time to paint something, but sometimes giving yourself a short time limit is beneficial because you stop overthinking the process and you just get on with it. I find often in art making, getting on with it is the way to go. We can often get bogged down by ideas of like being inspired and things like that. But the most successful artists are the most productive ones, not the most inspired ones. Inspiration's great, but it's not always available. And you might just find like when you just start working that it starts coming out of you. All right, let's do our greens here. So down here in the corner, I'm gonna put some jasmine. So jasmine weirdly is the national flower. We call it sampaguita, and sampaguita smells really, really good. And growing up there would be kids selling necklaces of sampaguita in the streets, just trying to make a living. Lots of kids like sell things like fruit and flowers in the middle of the road. Although nowadays, not so much anymore, they're selling bottled water and things like that. Sometimes bobbleheads, just whatever makes ends meet. There's also, of course, lots of kids who just beg for money. Growing up in a place with a lot of poverty, that stuff's really commonplace. Okay, so just laying down my greens here. Yeah, as I was talking about kids on the streets in the Philippines and how the last time I visited, it was really hard for me to see that. And it just really showed me how growing up there, you can become desensitized to just like sights like that. Watching kids huffing glue on the street was really commonplace. But then after a decade of living here in Halifax, that was really hard for me to see. It's kind of odd. Life is just really different in different places, you know? And you forget about that sometimes. You get so caught up in the environment you're in that you forget that others exist. All right. feel like I've got like a good first layer going here. Just gonna do a really rudimentary sort of background wash. This is probably not the right brush for it. If you're covering bigger areas, use a bigger brush. Makes sense. Especially if you're working with water-based paints like I am right now. They dry really fast, so you work faster. What am I going to do for the background? So I've got my red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and my violet. Maybe we'll do sort of like a more neutral so that the colors pop. Nothing too dark. I've got my browns here laid out, so I've got my ochre, a little sienna, make sort of a reddish brown here, nice sort of clay color, add a lot of white, and let's just do that and see how we feel about it. I'm not crazy about it, but you know what? This is just the first layer. And painting's all about layers, right? Color complexity. Okay, I'm just putting this all around, trying not to be too precious about it. Helps to work with a wet brush if you want to get that paint moving. You don't want it too wet either that you barely get any coverage. Unless that's what you're going for. In which case I would suggest you play around with watercolors. It's a pretty great medium. When I was a kid, I used to ride my bicycle around the subdivision and steal my neighbor's flowers. I was starting my own little garden at home. Don't do that, by the way. I don't encourage it. But it was something I did. Always had a knack for like gardening and plants and stuff. I just like being surrounded by living things. Like at home, I keep an aquarium. I used to have 5 of them. Nowadays, just the one. Sometimes you gotta downsize and do what makes sense. So I am painting the sides here, which is completely unnecessary. You do not have to do this, but I am intending to give this as a gift to a friend. And so I want to do something really, really finished. And I'm painting the sides so that, I don't know, like if they want to put it up on the wall without having to frame this, it'll look nice, even if you're just like looking at it from the side. I do love being thorough. All right, what did that take, like 30 seconds? No big deal. Okay, let's do the blue part here. Wonderful. All right, so while I'm doing this too, I'm giving myself a chance to let all of this paint dry so that I can paint over it. Check my little clock. Okay. Alrighty, so I've got sort of like a nice first layer here going. And now I'm gonna try and paint this sort of like front to back, back to front. First layer, down. Let's do the second. So I'm gonna leave the background alone for now. And I'm kind of gonna do the vase first, because it's kind of like behind all of the flowers. And then I'm gonna work on these leaves that are sort of like in the back, and then work my way back to front. And then when I'm done with that, I'll paint the background and sort of refine those edges. Okay? Vase. So this is going to be my purple element. Adding my dark colors first. Where do I want those shadows to be? I've decided also that I don't want this painting to be like too finished looking. I'm not going to go with something super realistic. I want the strokes of my brush to be expressive. Now if you want that sort of effect, that also means, first of all, again, not being too precious about it, but also trying to paint it in just one stroke and not going over the same parts over and over again. Because also what that does is it dulls your colors. Ooh, I'm liking this combination of blue and purple. So I'm trying to bring that sort of indigo vibe. Now I'm taking this sort of drier brush to sort of blend the colors together. So I want the idea of light. So right now I'm thinking of like maybe the light's coming down from the upper left side. So that's where I'm going to put my highlight. Let's add a little white to that, shall we? Maybe a little touch of green. Cool, just to like neutralize that color a bit. Remember, if you want to keep your colors pure, you gotta clean your brush. I also have a tendency to use the same brush through the whole painting, which is not advisable. It's good to have variation. You know, there are different kinds of brushes for a good reason. They all pull off their different effects. I can get a bit dogged sometimes about using the same brush. We all have our habits as painters. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's kind of amazing in your journey as an artist to discover the way that you paint, because we don't all do it the same way. I'm kind of happy with that, but I think I would like to have a little bit more variation. Ooh, what's that? So right now I'm just adding kind of like a white tone here. Kind of liking that brushy effect. So it was kind of weird growing up gay in the Philippines, or queer as Hali. We have a little bit of a different way of thinking about that sort of stuff. So like, back in the day, I used to be teased with the word bayot, which in the Visayas is kind of our equivalent to queer. The word is actually pre-colonial. Bayot was a class of person, if you will, or a gender. I can compare it only to the indigenous concept of like two-spiritedness. Although, honestly, the definition for what a bayot is has changed over the years, largely in part to the influence of the people who colonized us, but also Western media. But growing up in the 80s and 90s, a bayot was basically an effeminate man. And for a long time, I wrestled with identifying as what people were calling me, because I didn't often see myself that way. Sometimes I did. It was also like a weird situation where there wasn't a lot of room for diversity in the LGBTQ community. That's changing a lot though, or I would say it's changed a lot over the years. Thanks to things like the internet, Filipinos now have like a much more diverse idea of what it could mean to be queer or gay. That's all for the best, really. Part of the reason why I wanted to move to Canada was so that I could be free and participate in things like pride parades. You know, that was the sort of thing that I only ever really saw in shows like Queer as Folk or Will and Grace or what have you. I used to just ache to be in a place where I could wave a pride flag. So all that stuff still really matters to me. I love going to pride parades. I love seeing everybody on the street being themselves and celebrating something that, you know, in the city I grew up in, they still don't do. There hasn't been a single real pride parade there. You might get a crowd of like 50 people marching down the street with a banner or two. But it's not the spectacle that it is over here in the West. Even in Manila, there's still a lot of pushback against queer culture. But you know, that's what happens when you grow up in a Catholic country, I guess. The Philippines is something like 90% Christian or something like that. The rest is Muslim, mostly in the south. Religion is a big deal. I grew up religious myself. I was a Protestant Christian. And letting that go has been a beautiful journey. You know what? I'm kind of digging that vase. I'm just gonna add a little bit more darkness to it. I'm gonna mix brown and purple, which is one of my favorite ways to create a dark tone. Sometimes using straight up black can just be like very aggressive. There. Oh, I'm digging that. So yeah, moving to Canada has been really great for me as a queer person, insofar as like the freedoms I've been able to experience. It's kind of weird moving here and like a lot of people are already jaded about the freedoms that they enjoy, but that's okay. I think it's actually pretty wonderful that we live in a place where we can already take that stuff for granted. Because let me tell you, the opposite kind of sucks. All right. I might add to that later on, but right now I'm really happy with this like purple situation, which is good because like I'm painting this for somebody for whom like purple is their favorite color, or so I think. So now I'm gonna work my way from the back to the front. Let's do these leaves in the back. Taking this dark green, mixing it up with a little bit of a medium green. Right now I have like 5 greens going on in my palette. You might not have all of that variation, but then you can always like add a little yellow, add a little blue to change the tones of your greens. So when I was in university, there was actually a gay organization at school. I went to the University of the Philippines. There's actually a long-standing organization there called Ligaya. Ligaya in Filipino means happy, which I think is a little bit of a play on the word gay, which also used to mean happy. Or I guess still does in a way. I wanted to join Ligaya, but I didn't really feel all that welcome. At the time, everybody who was a member of Ligaya had to sort of like fit a certain type, I felt like. Because I wasn't a trans woman or like overly, what's the word? I guess I wasn't like effeminate enough for some people. I was labeled Maya, or like somebody who was trying to pass. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because people who are LGBTQ reject you because they feel like you're pretending to be straight or something in order to fit in. And then they feel like you're not experiencing the same kind of prejudice they are, so you're not really like one of them. And then at the same time, of course, like straight society rejects you because you're not one of them either. So that was like a weird thing growing up that I had to deal with. It was very confusing, because at the time too, I was like consuming a lot of like Western media that was telling me that, you know, that there's a sense of strong siblinghood in queer society. And I just didn't feel that. That's the thing, like at the time, I don't know if this has really changed, but there wasn't really a strong sense of community in the Philippines as far as like queer society. We didn't really look out for each other. I think a lot of that comes from the religious shame that we all had to deal with. I know that's changed a lot for a lot of people, and I'm really glad. Especially these days, because there's something really incredible going on in the Philippines, which is an HIV epidemic. Our numbers have really skyrocketed. Fortunately, people are responding well, and like in spite of the fact that it's such a Catholic place, condoms and other means of protection have really been promoted. And now in most parts of the Philippines, especially in major cities, you can get an HIV test result in 15 minutes. Access to drugs has been made a lot more accessible, and I mean drugs to help you deal with HIV. And all of that has been really important. It's kind of changed things a little bit. It reminds me of what happened when the HIV epidemic hit America in the 80s. It kind of forced people to come together. And now there is kind of a sense of community because people need to help each other through this. Suddenly we have to talk about it. And it's not just affecting people who are LGBTQ, right? It's affecting everyone. And in the time of COVID, whew, talk about a challenge. You know, sometimes I feel guilty that I'm not there dealing with it like everybody else is. I guess that's survivor's guilt for you. Nobody really talks so much about how guilty you feel sometimes immigrating to a different country, leaving your friends behind to deal with stuff that, in a way, you feel like you escaped. But also, how can you not feel grateful? It's a weird mix. That's life, I guess. Okay, I feel like I've got some nice deep greens here. I'm gonna try and like add a few lighter tones. I'm using a smaller brush this time. Just see how I feel about these light greens. Try and get that light I was talking about earlier. Let's add some yellow. This is a nice warm cadmium yellow. Well, that's not really going on very well. Let's add some white to that. I find if you're like, if you're painting with acrylics, there's such a wide array of paint brands to choose from. And some of them are very affordable, and you'll be tempted to just buy those cheap paints. But let me tell you, once you buy an expensive tube of paint and you start using it, you'll be amazed by the difference. So I try to invest in high quality, like white paint in particular, and black paint. And then the rest of the colors, I kind of like go with just like what I can afford. My professor always said, paint in the size of your life, which was his way of saying, accommodate your circumstances. So I'm just adding a little bit of light and shade to my leaves. To add some color complexity, I have mixed blue and brown to do my shadows and dark tones. Now, I'm not painting here from a model or anything, I'm just kind of like painting based on memory, which can be really fun. This is sort of like how I prefer to do it. It's not for everybody. I enjoy the challenge of imagining what it would look like. This is also how I like to draw characters. Kind of like push myself a little bit. Sometimes I push a little too hard. Alright. Already I'm starting to like the leaves a lot better now that I've added these dark tones. Just gives it more depth and body. Trying not to be too precious about it. After all, we do want to move on to the next thing. Let's add a few more highlights here though. Sometimes I find it's really good to mix colors that you normally wouldn't, just to see what happens. So I've got a little sky blue I've mixed up with a yellow and a little ochre and this ivory tone. Let's see what this looks like on the leaves. Yeah, I'm pretty okay with that. Maybe add a little green. Ooh, I'm digging that. Got this nice kind of jade green thing going on. Yeah. Alright, don't want to spend too much time on that. I'm going to work on the santan flowers. This definitely takes me back to my childhood. Spent a lot of time by myself just looking for spiders in these bushes. We used to do spider fights as kids. So what that would entail is finding tiny little spiders that we would call kakat, and then you would house them in these matchboxes with little partitions. Each spider had their own little apartment, and then you take a barbecue stick or just any kind of stick. Normally we have these brooms that we call walis ting ting, and it's made out of the middle vein of a coconut leaf. So you would strip the leafy parts and like take that long sort of, I guess it's a stick, whatever you want to call it, and gather them up together and dry them up, and it's like a great way to rake leaves. Anyway, we'd take one of those and then put a spider on either end. They would meet in the middle and duke it out. probably not cool. Back in the day though, it was the thing to do. And it was kind of fun. But yeah, I used to look for kakat in the santan bushes. You get a lot of like crab spiders, which, you know, if you don't know what those look like, they look pretty cool. Or these spiders that we call Mr. X, because they have these like patterns that they draw on their webs that look like X's. I also used to love going around and just like picking up grasshoppers and praying mantises. Oh, I'm liking that. So santan come in like all sorts of colors. Sometimes they're white. Most of them are red. But in this case I chose orange because I wanted some orange representation. I am digging that. Ooh, all right. I'm pretty happy with that. I might go into a little bit more detail on that a little later, but at this moment, just wanna like get on with it. That is the theme of the day, get on with it. I do advise making sound effects while you paint. Never mind the people around you. This is your experience. Whoops. I do have a bad habit of putting my palm on the painting. A lot of painters will take a stick and like park it like that, and then do this sort of trick. But I like to make life harder for myself, and I just don't do that. Okay, let's do this bird of paradise. Kind of putting the shadow down. And building on top of that. I'm not sure why they call these birds of paradise. They don't really look like birds to me. But okay. Who does name all these flowers anyway? It's kind of cool growing up, kind of like learning the English and Filipino names for these things. Well, I don't remember what the Filipino word is for this. That's another weird thing they don't tell you when you move abroad, is you forget stuff. I remember one time I couldn't remember the Filipino word for peanut, and it drove me nuts. And I had to call home long distance just to be like, how do you say peanut? I moved here with my sister in 2006, and it was good having somebody from home to like speak Bisaya with. But then she moved back and I stayed. She went and married her first boyfriend. And I stuck around, you know, for freedom. And then I didn't have anybody to practice with. And I did try to connect with the Filipino community here, but I found myself feeling a lot like an outsider, partially because like I'm gay or whatever, and some people didn't know how to deal with that. And also some of the gay people here had a hard time connecting with me because I'm mixed race, and like I didn't grow up like with the same sort of circumstances that they did, so they found it hard to connect to me. That's just the way it goes. It is kind of weird being mixed race, because like you're foreign everywhere. That's actually part of the reason why I moved here. So I'm half white. My dad is from Nova Scotia, although if you ask him, he'll say Saskatchewan. And I kind of moved here to get to know his side of the family better, and also to see if like I might feel more at home here as somebody who's half white. Because growing up there, I was never really like a full-fledged Filipino, or just not Filipino enough or something. But then I moved here and now I'm only Filipino. It's kind of weird. People will always make you out to be whatever they want you to be, is what I learned. And you sort of just need to invent your own idea of home. It's partially why I got this tattoo sleeve. So I could make a home for myself on my skin and kind of own it. I'm gonna move on from that. I feel like I've spent way too much time on that. Let's move on to this pink flower. All right. Painting this bitter flower. Lots of good memories associated with this particular plant. It just seemed like it was everywhere growing up. I guess in a way painting this is giving me the opportunity to get nostalgic. Alright, let's add a little shadow to that. I feel like it's a little bit too... Well, first of all, let's add a little orange. Ooh, I'm kind of liking how that pops. It doesn't really belong on it, but it looks good, so I'm keeping it. It's always good to be able to surprise yourself sometimes. Of course, this is why it takes me so long to paint stuff, because I'm always doing stuff I don't expect. I think I want a little bit yellow. Ooh, I'm happy with that. Yeah. Yep. Let's do the plumeria, which is actually what I know to be kalachuchi. This is one of my favorite flowers because it smells so good. And so these grow on trees, and when they're in full bloom, oh my gosh, you can smell them for miles. I guess it would be like, the closest thing I can think of, like in comparison to it here, would be like when lilacs are in bloom here and you can smell them everywhere. Oh, it's lovely. And a lot of these kalachuchi trees bloom, or they grow by the sea. I do miss the smell of a tropical ocean. It's not that different, but I challenge you one day to go and see the Pacific Ocean in a tropical place and just compare it to the Atlantic Ocean, because there is a difference. It's weird how you're gonna get attached to a particular ocean. It doesn't make a lot of sense. liking that so far. Plumeria, plumeria. So this tree also has like a really gummy sap. And if you get it on your clothes, it's really sticky. Used to love climbing these trees. Climbing trees in general. Okay, let's do these Philippine violets now. This is our little blue area. I love how it's kind of like a periwinkle blue. Definitely one of my favorite kinds of blue. Gonna need some white for that. Ooh, I love that color. If you're painting something and you're going, ooh, that's a good sign. Nothing quite like enjoying what you're doing. So I was just telling Courtney here how I went into painting for idealistic reasons. I've always been artistically inclined, and my family said that I was drawing long before I was talking, but I never really thought I'd be an artist. I was also a real nerd, and science is like running my family. Like my dad's a scientist, both my grandparents are scientists, my uncle is a scientist. And I was kind of expected to go down that path because my grades were really good. But I think partially because I'm queer and movies and poems and books and paintings and things like that had such a positive effect on me as far as like learning how to accept myself. And also seeing that effect in others, it made me see how art and creativity have this amazing transformative quality. Because it reaches you not just on an intellectual level, but also an emotional one. And people are emotional and intellectual, and hormonal and physical and all the rest. And I really believe in the power of creativity and art to transform, because it transformed me. So I guess in like a corny way, getting into the arts was a mission to pay it forward. So this kind of jasmine, I don't know if it's any different from other kinds, but they tend to have 7 petals, which I don't know why I like that, but I like the idea of a 7-petaled flower. I really do miss the way this smells. We used to have this plant in one of the houses that we lived in, and my God, it smelled good. Ooh, okay, our second layer is looking pretty good here. Just gonna do my bougainvillea. This is bringing back memories of art school. All right, so I feel like I've got a good second layer going. I'm gonna turn my canvas upside down just to see how I feel about the balance of it all. In fact, I think I'm gonna paint it this way for now. So I start thinking about it less in terms of like what it is, and I'm starting to see it now as like fields of color and shape, which is good. So I'm gonna warm up this background a little bit. I love when you get close to the end of a painting and you've got like a lot of layers going, and then you get to just like make it all pretty. This is my favorite part, is finishing up a painting. The first layers kind of test my patience a little bit, but that's normal. Just like if I was building a house, probably putting down the beams would be less exciting to me than decorating. But we all have our strengths. Cool, so I'm picking background colors too that will allow the flowers to pop. Don't want to have too much of like the same tone. Otherwise, all of that work is for naught. Yes. It's always hard to figure out when to stop. Sometimes if you get like a really good expressive brush stroke, you just want to leave that there. Ooh, I'm kind of liking that. Moving on to the other side. Notice how I'm like taking this time also to refine my edges and stuff. I don't want this to look super, super finished, so I'm liking this sort of sketchy, brushy effect. And I also want you to notice how like that underlayer of like taupe or neutral beige is like giving all of the tones that I'm putting over it now a little bit more interest. It's like personality. All of the stuff underneath makes the stuff on the surface more interesting. Can never help thinking about metaphors for life when I'm doing this stuff, but it's also maybe just the way my mind works. But also probably because I did go into painting for idealistic reasons. I'm always asking myself, how is this improving me? Or how is this improving others? Sometimes that can get in the way of just like painting a pretty picture. And I forget sometimes that it's just fun. But doing stuff like this, especially doing it for a friend, it feels really good. I definitely recommend painting for other people. See what that feels like. You know, often painting can be such like a navel-gazing activity. You're alone usually. And just like painting your thoughts and feelings or whatever. Kind of liking the orange. That has really warmed it up. Okay. Feeling pretty happy with my background. Yeah. Looking at it now, those orange suntan flowers don't really pop so much anymore, but I will address that. Let's do the table. I feel like my table is a little bit too blue, so I'm gonna like dull that a little bit. I'm mixing it with yellows and oranges just to sort of like kill the intensity a little bit. I like that. So the sienna is, I find, making the blue look really cool. I don't know how it's gonna dry, but right now I like how it looks, so I'm going for it. Yeah, that is looking better to me. Got mixing it now with like a little bit of a flesh tone. Which is a weird thing to call a color since flesh comes in so many tones. But that's colonialism. A lot of Filipino painting traditions come from sort of Spanish roots because we were a colony of Spain for like over 300 years. All right, so I'm just like adding color complexity to this. I find like putting the oranges and stuff there, it's like really helping. Complementary colors bring each other out. Don't be afraid to use your fingers sometimes. Oh my gosh, I'm really digging that so far. So I feel like I got my background down, and now I'm just gonna refine what I've got. I feel like I'm just adding some finishing touches, and then when I show this to you at the end, you will see the finished product. Alright, so I added a bunch of finishing touches, just sort of like fast forwarded through the process. Yeah, I feel like this is ready to give away. So that is my whole process. Thanks for watching and sticking around and getting to know me and stuff, and I hope that when you try this yourself that it's fun for you. Alright.